9 million people. That was the promise. 9 million human beings living inside a single continuous structure. A building 170 kilometers long, 500 meters tall, 200 meters wide. A city compressed into a line. When Saudi Arabia unveiled the line in January 2021, the renderings showed a glittering mirror facade stretching across the desert. The promotional videos depicted happy residents walking through lush gardens suspended in the sky. The architect spoke of revolutionary density, of liberating humanity from the tyranny of horizontal sprawl. But behind the CGI in the marketing language, there was a number, a calculation so extraordinary that it should have ended the conversation before it began. 9 million people. One structure, 170 kilometers. Do the math. That's approximately 52,941 people per kilometer of building length. But the line isn't just long, it's narrow. 200 meters wide, which means the actual living space is constrained to a ribbon of structure barely wider than 2 football fields placed end to end. The question nobody asked in public: has anyone calculated what this density actually means? The answer, it turns out, is yes. Engineers calculated it. Urban planners calculated it. Demographers calculated it. And every single calculation produced the same conclusion. This density has never existed in human history. Not in the favelas of Rio. Not in the towers of Hong Kong. Not in the most crowded slums of Mumbai or Dhaka or Lagos. The line proposed something unprecedented. A population density so extreme that it would require rewriting everything we know about how human beings can live together. Let's begin with a simple exercise. Take the total volume of the line as originally designed. Length, 170 kilometers. Height, 500 meters. Width, 200 meters. Total volume, 17 billion cubic meters. Now divide that by 9 million residents. Each resident gets approximately 1,889 cubic meters of total building volume. That sounds generous until you remember that this volume must contain everything, not just apartments. Everything. Transportation systems, the high-speed rail running the length of the structure, the vertical elevators, the horizontal people movers, the loading docks, the maintenance corridors, infrastructure, water treatment plants, electrical substations, sewage processing, waste management, data centers, climate control systems, the machinery required to keep 9 million people alive, commercial space, shops, restaurants, offices, factories, warehouses, everything. A city of 9 million needs to function economically. Public space, schools, hospitals, parks, recreation facilities, community centers, religious buildings, government offices, structural requirements, the walls themselves, which at 500 meters tall must be enormously thick at the base, the foundation systems, the cross-bracing, the fire breaks, the evacuation routes. After accounting for all of this, urban engineers estimated that actual residential space would constitute perhaps 30 to 40% of total volume. Some estimates were lower, which means each resident's actual living space shrinks dramatically. We're no longer talking about spacious apartments. We're talking about something else entirely. The density calculation that matters isn't volume, it's floor area. And when you calculate floor area per resident in the line, the number that emerges is startling. Approximately 265,000 people per square kilometer. For context, Manila, the densest major city on Earth, has 44,000 people per square kilometer. The line proposed density 3 times greater than Dharavi, not through accident, not through organic growth, not through poverty forcing people into inadequate space. B. Design. To understand this number, you must first understand what current density looks like. Kowloon walled city. Before its demolition in 1993, this Hong Kong enclave held approximately 33,000 people and 2.6 hectares. That's roughly 1.27 million people per square kilometer. The highest density ever recorded in human history. And it was, by all accounts, barely survivable. Residents of Kowloon City lived in rooms so small they could touch all four walls while lying down. Sunlight never reached the lower floors. The air was thick with moisture and mold. Disease spread rapidly. Fire was a constant terror because evacuation was nearly impossible through corridors barely wide enough for one person. But Kowloon City was 14 stories tall at its highest point. The line is 500 meters, more than 100 stories. The line's designers argued that vertical expansion solves density problems. More floors mean more space, distributed vertically, reducing the crush at any single level. This is theoretically true, but it introduces new problems that Kowloon City never faced. Vertical transportation. Moving millions of people up and down 100-plus floors requires elevator systems of unprecedented scale. Engineers estimated the line would need approximately 400,000 elevators to function. That's more elevators than exist in all of New York City's buildings combined. Each elevator requires shafts, machinery rooms, maintenance access, and backup power systems. This infrastructure consumes enormous amounts of the building's volume. Structural requirements. A 500-meter-tall building doesn't scale linearly from a 50-meter building. The structural supports at the base must be massive to hold the weight above. Floor plates shrink as you go higher, or walls thicken, or both. Usable space decreases precisely where you need it most. Emergency systems. Fire codes exist for a reason. A 500-meter building with 265,000 people per square kilometer requires evacuation capacity that has never been engineered. You cannot simply add more stairwells. Each stairwell consumes floor space on every level. The math doesn't work. The closer engineers looked at the line's density promises, the more the promises dissolved into physical impossibility. Here's a number that appears in no NEOM promotional material. According to internal planning documents reported by the Financial Times, the line's original design allocated approximately 26 square meters of living space per resident. 26 square meters. That's 280 square feet. For comparison, the average American home, 211 square meters per resident. The average UK home, 76 square meters per resident. The average Hong Kong apartment, 45 square meters per resident. The average Tokyo micro apartment, 25 square meters per resident. A standard prison cell in the United States. .6 square meters. The line offered marginally more space than a Tokyo micro-apartment. For 9 million people in the desert. In a building marketed as a luxurious revolutionary lifestyle, but 26 square meters was the optimistic number. That calculation assumed perfect efficiency. Zero wasted space. Minimal corridos, shared walls between every unit. No public gathering areas larger than absolutely necessary. Independent analysts who examined the line's published specifications calculated lower numbers. Some estimates suggested 15 to 20 square meters per resident. Others suggested that achieving 9 million residents within the stated dimensions would require going below 15 square meters. At 15 square meters, you are not describing an apartment. You are describing a capsule. Tokyo has capsule hotels. Hong Kong has cage homes. These are considered symptoms of housing crises, evidence of societal failure, conditions to be remedied as quickly as possible. The line proposed building this as a feature. When the line was announced, Saudi officials compared it favorably to the world's great cities. More efficient than New York, more livable than Tokyo, more sustainable than Singapore. They did not compare it to Dharavi. They did not compare it to Kowloon City. They did not compare it to the favelas, the barrios, the slums, the refugee camps of the world, where high density emerges from desperation rather than design. But the numbers force the comparison. Consider Dharavi in Mumbai. Houses approximately 1 million people in 2.1 square kilometers. Conditions are challenging. Open sewers, limited water access, informal electrical connections. Disease. But Dharavi is a neighborhood. People can walk outside. There are streets, there is sky. The line proposed housing 9 times Dharavi's population in a fully enclosed structure with no exterior access. No streets in the traditional sense. No sky above except what could be seen through 200 meters of glass and steel. The density was similar in number but radically different in character. Dharavi has organic flexibility. Residents adapt their spaces. Buildings expand upward and outward informally. The neighborhood breathes. The line, as designed, had no flexibility. Every cubic meter was pre-planned, every function pre-assigned, every movement This is the difference between a slum and a prison. A slum is chaotic, dangerous, often miserable, but it belongs to its residents. They shape it, modify it, make it theirs. A prison, however comfortable, is designed by someone else. You live in the space you're given. You move through corridors someone else drew. You exist within constraints someone else imposed. The line, at 9 million residents, was not proposing a city. It was proposing the largest controlled human environment ever conceived. 9 million people require services. Let's examine what the line would need to function, assuming that density actually worked. Hospitals. The World Health Organization recommends 3 hospital beds per 1,000 population. 9 million people requires 27,000 hospital beds. A typical large hospital has 500 to 1,000 beds. The line would need approximately 30 to 50 full-scale hospitals, distributed along its 170-kilometer length. Where do you put 50 hospitals in a building 200 meters wide? Schools. Assuming standard demographics, approximately 15% of the line's population would be school-age. That's 1.35 million students. The average school serves 500 to 1,000 students. The line would need roughly 1,500 to 2,500 schools. Where do you put 2,000 schools? Water. 9 million people in a desert environment consume enormous quantities of water. Estimates suggest the line would require 1.5 to 2 million cubic meters of desalinated water per day. This requires massive desalination infrastructure, pipeline systems, pumping stations, and storage facilities. The Red Sea coast provides access to seawater, but the line extends 170 kilometers inland. The engineering required to pump water to the far end of the structure, and then vertically 500 meters to the upper floors, boggled imagination. Waste. 9 million people produce approximately 13,000 to 15,000 tons of solid waste per day. Where does it go? How does it travel through a continuous building? The line's promotional materials mentioned pneumatic waste systems, tubes that would vacuum garbage to processing centers. No pneumatic system at this scale has ever been built. Food. 9 million people require approximately 25 million meals per day. The line planned to incorporate vertical farms, AI-optimized growing systems, robotic food distribution. None of these technologies exist at remotely the scale required. Every service calculation produced the same result. The line would require infrastructure systems beyond any ever constructed, operating perfectly, simultaneously, for decades. The margin for error was zero. The engineering firms hired to design the line understood the density problem. Internal documents obtained by various media outlets revealed early warnings. Consultants from major engineering firms flagged concerns about population targets. Architects questioned livability at proposed densities. Urban planners noted that no comparable project existed to serve as reference. According to the Financial Times, which interviewed more than 20 people who worked on the line, a recurring theme emerged. The numbers were announced before the calculations were complete. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman had declared the vision. 9 million people. 170 kilometers, 500 meters tall. These specifications were not negotiable. When engineers pointed out that the mathematics produced impossible densities, they were told to find solutions. When architects noted that 26 square meters per person was barely livable, they were told to optimize layouts. When urban planners warned that cities don't function at this density, they were reminded that the line was not a city. It was a revolution. One senior consultant, speaking anonymously, described the atmosphere. We kept building models that showed this couldn't work as specified. The response was always the same. Make it work. Find efficiencies. Use technology. Don't say impossible. Nobody in a position of authority could tell the Crown Prince that his vision violated physics, and so the calculations continued. The models grew more sophisticated, the assumptions became more aggressive, the promised technologies became more speculative, and the density remained impossible. In late 2024, reports began emerging that the line had been dramatically scaled back. The new specifications, confirmed by multiple sources, were staggering in their reduction. Original length, 170 kilometers. New length, original population, 9 million. New population, 300,000. That's a 98.6% reduction in length, a 96.7% reduction in population. The density problem had been solved, finally, by abandoning the original vision almost entirely. But even at 300,000 people and 2.4 kilometers, questions remained. The revised density was still approximately 125,000 people per square kilometer if the full structure were built. Still roughly 3 times denser than Manila. Still unprecedented in planned urban development. More troublingly, the reduction raised a fundamental question. If the engineers always knew 9 million was impossible, why was it promised? The answer appears to lie in the nature of the project itself. The line was never primarily an engineering project. It was a statement, a brand, a demonstration of Saudi Arabia's ambition and capability. The specific numbers mattered less than their impressiveness. 9 million sounds revolutionary. 300,000. Songzaka neighborhood. The announcement created excitement, attracted attention, positioned Saudi Arabia as a leader in futuristic development. The quiet reduction, years later, attracted far less notice. By then, billions had been spent. The narrative had been established. The world had moved on to the next spectacle. What does it mean to design a city for 9 million people without considering whether 9 million people can actually live there? This question extends beyond the line, beyond Saudi Arabia, beyond any single project. Around the world, architects and developers speak of solving housing crises through density. Build taller. Build denser. Optimize every square meter. Use technology to transcend traditional limits. The line represented the logical extreme of this thinking. If density is good, maximum density must be better. If technology can improve efficiency, sufficient technology can overcome any constraint. But human beings are not data points to be optimized. We require space, not just to survive, but to thrive. We need room to move, to gather, to be alone, to be together in ways we choose rather than ways we're assigned. We need sunlight and air, and the possibility of spontaneity. The traditional city, for all its flaws, emerged organically from human needs. Streets formed where people walked. Markets appeared where people gathered. Neighborhoods grew where communities formed. The line proposed replacing all of this with engineered perfection. Every function calculated. Every movement planned. Every square meter allocated by algorithm. At low densities, in small sections, this might have worked. 1,000 people can live in almost any configuration if the configuration is well designed. At 9 million, the engineering overwhelmed the humanity. People were no longer residents. They were units to be housed. Space was no longer lived in. It was allocated. Community was no longer organic. It was mandated. The failed density calculation of the line reveals something important about the limits of ambitious planning. You can design a building. You can engineer a structure. You can calculate loads and flows and capacities. But you cannot calculate a city. Cities are not machines. They are organisms. They grow, adapt, breathe, fail, recover, transform. They resist optimization because human beings resist optimization. The line attempted to deny this fundamental truth. 9 million people. One building. Perfect efficiency. Total control. The mathematics said no, and eventually, reluctantly, reality agreed. The revised line, at 2.4 kilometers and 300,000 residents, may yet be built. It would be extraordinary architecture, unprecedented engineering, a genuine achievement, but it would not be the revolution that was promised. It would be, simply, a building. Large, impressive, expensive, impractical in many ways, but ultimately subject to the same constraints that govern all human construction. The vision of housing 9 million people in a single structure remains what it always was. A number on a presentation slide, a figure in a promotional video, a dream that mathematics could not support. The desert around NEOM stretches empty to the horizon. The mirror walls rise only in renderings, and the 9 million residents exist nowhere except in the imagination of those who believed that ambition alone could overcome arithmetic.